We're going to move on to the next group, a group of students from the US and 3 students who are based in Greenland, 2 from Greenland and 1 from Denmark, working in the field. And this group, the fish group, has been working on aquatic biodiversity. So I'll turn it over to them.
Oh, sorry. Welcome to our presentation made by the fish group. Next, please. What is the point of the whole result? Well, the point is to find out the effect of temperature and precipitation on biodiversity, and we intend to answer our central question: how do the differences temperature and precipitation affect the biodiversity in different aquatic habitats with the information we collected? Next.
So why we chose this question, there were a lot of considerations that we looked at when we were constructing our question. We really wanted to take advantage of kind of how spread out we all were geographically. We're located all over the US and then also Greenland. So we're across 6 different biomes collectively. We also, thinking about climate change, wanted to kind of look into how future environmental changes could affect biodiversity in different biomes and the places where we live. And then finally, we chose to study aquatic macroinvertebrae because they're good bioindicators, meaning that they're very sensitive to environmental changes like temperature and precipitation, which is what we studied. And so they were really good organisms for us to work with. Next. And we wanted to go over some important vocabulary that'll be popping up throughout the presentation. So first, biodiversity is the variety of life in a particular habitat or ecosystem. A biome is a large region of Earth that has a certain climate, and temperature and precipitation are kind of key characteristics in determining a biome. Macroinvertebrae are organisms without backbones, and they're visible without the aid of a microscope. And we specifically looked at aquatic macroinvertebrae, which just live near rocks and sediment on the bottom of lakes, rivers, and streams. Precipitation is rain, snow, sleet, or hail that falls to the ground. And finally, fish stocking is when fish are released into a river, lake, or ocean to either increase existing populations or create a population where there wasn't one before.
All right, so our methods. Well, first of all, what materials and data did we use? Well, since we're not all here up in Greenland, we didn't have the opportunity to use the exact same tools. So just for a comparison, we have 2 different cups in the right top and right bottom. So as you can guess, our results varied a bit. But we also had to take our samples, we had to get some containers, in our case plastic bags or other stuff we could contain our samples in. But up here in Kangerlussuaq, Greenland, and Penny, I know, she used a thermometer and microscope as well for this research. And how did we do our sampling? Erica, can I get you to press twice? Thank you. Welcome to How to Do Fieldwork 101. Well, first of all, we started by disturbing the water for 15 seconds, and then we scooped 5 cups of water and dirt. Whatever landed in the cup, we took, stuffed it in the container, and then we moved on and went home, where we would put everything out on the table in a cup or something, and just find everything that was alive, and then we would identify it. As well as all this physical equipment, we also had something called Niang Veda, which we will cover later. But just to get something of it out now, it's something that provides us with more data, which will lead to better and more precise results. So how does this help our research? Well, our fieldwork normally the field work is used for better understanding how natural environments and it's used for better understanding how the natural environment and its functions. And in our case, we needed to understand the macroorganisms we were working with. And by doing so, we got an understanding of what made their ponds or lakes so habitable. And by doing this, we covered a bit of our conclusion. Next slide, please.
So Niang Veda is data from the National Ecological Observatory Network, where we saw the organisms in 7 lakes across the United States, from Alaska to Florida, and the microorganisms that were in those lakes. With this information, we could see the biodiversity of the lakes and then compare them to the ones that we got in our field data with the people that went to the different lakes around their country. So the way that we use this data, it was mainly as a way of creating a similar data set to the one that we were getting. So that way we could compare results, and that would help us reach a better, more structured conclusion. Next.
So if you look at the graph on the left, it shows our group's biome placement relative to temperature and precipitation. And as you can see, the tropical seasonal forest and savanna has the most precipitation and hottest temperature, while the tundra has the least precipitation and the lowest temperature. The woodlands, shrublands, and temperate seasonal forests are closer to the middle. We were able to test a very diverse biome range, as our group is very spread out over the US and Greenland, which was good. Next slide. Here is a graph showing the correlation between the average temperature at each individual site and the number of orders we found. And when we say orders, we mean the specific type of species classified. And this data suggests that as temperature increases, so does the biodiversity. Next slide. Similar to the previous graph, here we have one comparing annual precipitation from each biome location tested to the number of orders found at the sites. Again, this data suggests that as precipitation increases, so does the biodiversity. Next. And here we have a bar graph of the number of orders we found in our fieldwork relative to our biome type. The hot and wet tropical seasonal forest and savanna contain the most number of orders, while the cold and dry tundra contain the least number of orders. It is clear, looking at this graph, that as the biome temperature and precipitation increased, the number of orders increased, and vice versa. Next.
So the results that we were able to draw from both our field data as well as the data that we collected through the NEON database is, number one, that the NEON data did not show any discernible trend relative to temperature and precipitation, neither positive or negative compared to biodiversity. Our field data, nevertheless, showed a positive correlation by both temperature and precipitation to regards to biodiversity. And third, we were also able to see that colder biomes tend to have less biodiversity than hotter biomes, which correlates to what the data we collected. Next.
Hi, so here are some examples of samples taken by JSEP students, and the two, like towards the left, were from the group in Greenland. They found a ram snail and an aquatic worm, as well as a case-building caddisfly larva, which was a pretty common thing to find, it seems like. And someone also found some mayfly nymphs. Next.
Hi. So the significance of our results is that overall our findings suggested that there was a general trend which showed a link between precipitation and temperature increase and greater biodiversity. This trend is common across the globe and can be seen due to the fact that there is an increase of biodiversity shown moving from the colder polar regions to the humid tropic zones of the equatorial region. Other studies hypothesize that the trend could be linked to primary productivity, which is the rate that photosynthetic organisms can produce organic compounds from CO2 in an ecosystem. And other studies tested the relationship with habitat size or temperature, like us. Next slide.
So the other part of our scientific question had to do with how biodiversity relates to climate change. So how can this information be interpreted with respect to the future and climate change? So we know that as environmental conditions shift, species will be forced to adapt or migrate. So even seemingly minor changes in rainfall patterns, precipitation, or temperature fluctuations of just a few degrees could have major impacts on an ecosystem. So as illustrated by the diagrams towards the right, ecosystems are deeply interconnected. So even the loss of a single species, particularly if it's a so-called keystone species, could have devastating impacts on biodiversity. Next, sorry.
So these two charts show the impact of climate change across the globe. As you can see on the left, changes in precipitation will occur, most significantly the increase of rainfall in the winter and corresponding decrease in the summer. On the right, you can see the temperature changes that occur, which overall depicts a temperature increase. Next.
Okay, so how does the temperature change affect aquatic insects and fish? So aquatic insects' ideal temperature to function are from 7.2 degrees Celsius to 18.3 degrees Celsius. And a temperature increase for fish means reduction in the number of wild fish and introducing more predators for them. So the increase of temperature is forcing insects to change their behavior to survive. And that affects the fish because the fish mainly prey on these aquatic insects. So it's causing this whole chain reaction. Next slide. So the overall effect of climate change on ecosystems. Climate change is causing alterations in average temperature and rainfall yearly. This forces organisms to either adapt, migrate, or die. Adaptation to changing climate by species like aquatic insects causes a chain reaction in the ecosystem. Eventually, all animals who rely on aquatic insects as food source need to adapt. The future of global biodiversity is dependent on species' ability to adapt. If species can adapt, then biodiversity will be preserved. If not, biodiversity will suffer. Next slide.
Sources of error. Pollution, human activity, for example, trash. Proximity to town cities, like if you are closer to cities and towns, there's a high chance that there will be more trash and more pollution. And fish stocking and other factors not measured, and data uncertainty. For example, human error and not similar equipment. Lack of variety in independent variables. For example, the Niang Veda covered less different kind of biomes compared to the fish group. Yeah, next.
All in all, our research led for many questions to arise, such as whether human intervention has a notable effect on biodiversity, such as pollution and stocking, but will this ever reach a magnitude so that it eclipses the effect of temperature and precipitation? Also, are there more unrecognized or unresearched factors that contribute to the amount of biodiversity in a certain habitat? Finally, will humans in the future be able to utilize science and technology to engineer solutions which allow us to combat the negative effects of climate change on biodiversity? That's the end of our presentation. Thank you so much to Maddie and Lauren and Reggae for their guidance, and to all the mentors for making this all possible.
Thank you so much. So we can unmute for a round of applause.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
And if there are questions, please put those into the chat. There's already one coming in. The first question from Robert Baker is, will climate warming trends lead to more biodiversity?
Well, I can take this one. So as the temperature and precipitation change, I mean, it's going to force species to adapt. So if the species can adapt, then they'll survive. But some species might not be able to adapt, and they might end up dying out and going extinct. So we don't really know at this point. but most likely it will not increase biodiversity.
For the answer bar, other questions for the aquatic group? Celia asks, why is it harder for fish to live with just a few degrees increase in temperature?
All right, I can actually answer this one. Well, if you have microorganisms, you need something to eat them, but they are very fragile, which means the hotter it gets, they need to adapt faster. And if they can't, they will die out, and the fish's food sources will vanish as well. And therefore, just a few degrees in temperature change can lead to extinction.
Thank you, Julius. Any other questions for the aquatics group?